Make sure we're live real quick. Okay. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Wolf. Really excited to get into this conversation. Today, I'm joined by Giovanni. He is the creator of the Bitcoin power law theory, which is pretty fascinating to me. He jumped in our Bitcoin mining space. I invited him, and I don't know what it was that didn't register, but I was like, wait a second. What am I doing? I need to get this guy on a podcast so I can do a one-on-one conversation with him, and we can dive deep into power law. It's something we talk about a lot about. Some people on one side of the aisle, people are like, Bitcoin law theory people are crazy. There's no way this doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. And then there's some people who are like, yes, you're absolutely wrong. And in a few years, you're going to see how wrong you were. So Giovanni, really appreciate you coming on. If you could just give like a quick little, minute or less kind of breakdown of who you are, and then we'll dive into why you jumped into Bitcoin and then how you developed this theory, because it is kind of taking the world by storm a little bit, and it's a really, really fascinating conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So I am a scientist, since I was a little kid. Basically, a scientist is like a little kid that it stays a little kid, So I graduated eventually over the years in astrophysics. That is my field, at least where I did my PhD. I worked professionally in the field. I was a professor of physics in a small college for several years. And then I went to Northwestern. I kind of pivoted a little bit for personal and other reasons. I went into neuroscience. It was very interesting because I brought in all the tools that I had developed in physics to this new field, and kind of remind me a little bit what I did eventually with Bitcoin, because I had to convince a lot of people about things that were not very familiar. They didn't know about some of the things that for me were obvious as a physicist, but because this new angle, a new way of thinking about the field, in this case neuroscience, I was able to do a lot of progress in a very short time. I got a patent. I got, in fact, actually, I got a lot of world recognition. Some of my work has been shown on Wall Street Journal. This was not even Bitcoin. It was about my work in neuroscience. With Smithsonian, many different avenues. And then during that period, when I went from astrophysics to neuroscience, I actually discovered Bitcoin pretty early on. I actually downloaded the wallet in 2010, believe it or not.
Whoa.
And at that time I was mostly interested in this idea of mining, because it's funny how in life you connect the dots in different way, right? It depends on your experiences. And in my case, I am a scientist, but like many nerds, I like video games, right? And I was playing these video games where it's called EVE Online, where you had like barges, like mining barges, and you can go and mine asteroids, and I even wrote code, to actually do this automatically, right? Where I was sleeping, but it was kind of cheating. I was not allowed, but I did it anyway, right? Like some code that allowed me to do things when I was not there. And the idea of mining using your computer didn't sound that crazy to me, like, oh yeah, of course you can do that, right? I understood it's a process, right? And you can get this coin, and this coin were real, and they were worth almost nothing, but I knew that one day they will go somewhere, right? I didn't realize how much, because otherwise I would have been super motivated to do it. And I was not enough, right? I didn't follow through. And that is one of the things that actually, if anything, people like me that, the OGs should be all the time used by young people like you as a source of knowledge and experience. Even if sometimes you have, I have a young, relatively young son too. And I know you have to go through the experience, right? Older guy like me can tell you, don't do this, don't do that. Yep. And then until you do it, you don't learn it, because you have to do it yourself. But, you can still learn something.
You're so right.
But, in that case, I didn't do anything because it was a little bit complicated. Today is so much easier. Everything is so easy. And there are so many tools and information over there, and people that have done it before. But at that time, you had to learn everything from scratch. So I did. It was complicated for me to set up a pool and I say, I'm going to do it, and I put it in the back burner. And it was really stupid because I could have mined a lot of Bitcoin. But then a couple of years later, I know, right? Because at that time you could mine with your desktop, right? You could get a few Bitcoin within a few days, right? And then 2 years later, I heard about this Bitcoin again, right? Because of my interest in science, my interest in computers, etc. And in that circles where most of the time people were talking about Bitcoin, it was a relatively small circle, right? Mostly nerds, other nerds. And then at that point, I read actually an article. They put it in a very interesting, let's say, context. And that was strongly motivating for me because it kind of was speaking in my language. It was an article about, I'm very interested in these future trends like AI and cyborgs and robots and all kinds of things like that. And this was from newsletters I was signed up for that was talking about these ideas, about AI. This was like, 12 years ago when if you say to people, oh, you will be able to chat with intelligently, right, with an AI, nobody believed you. But the people that I was talking to, this is what they were saying. They were exactly saying that, it will take about 10 years, 10, 15 years to actually have a functional AI. And among the other things that they mentioned, it was Bitcoin. And they put it in that context saying, many of us that are interested in these futuristic trends want to do things like defeating cancer, going to Mars, doing all these incredible projects like Elon Musk, right? But there are not many Elon Musk because, the resources are limited. But, there is this new thing called Bitcoin. And at that time was $9. And you can buy it. And the guy was saying in that article, he will go all the way to $1 million. He was having that kind of vision,
So he knew back then.
Yeah. I can give you a link of it article because it's really cool. I love these early articles about visionary and what they saw in Bitcoin. And I was completely convinced. I didn't have any doubt. I don't know when people say, oh, I didn't understand it. Of course, it takes time to understand it, but I jumped in completely, and at that time, yes, this is when I decided. And at the bottom of this article was like a little chart. There was not much data, imagine, right? This was 2012. So, and the first exchanges opened 2010. This is when we started to get real data, right? Continuous data about Bitcoin price. And the guy was claiming two things. One was that there was like a large bubble, the first bubble that we had before the halving. Everybody familiar with the chart knows that bubble. The price went all the way to $30 and then crashed it to $3 or something like that. It sounds ridiculous.
Sounds like our meme coins that we're trading right now in the trenches.
Right, exactly. And people were worried that it was some kind of exactly like a meme coin, but we didn't have a terminology then. But they used the tulip, right? The reference to the tulip in Netherlands in the 1700s, right? When there was that craze, right, about the tulips. Everybody wanted to buy tulips and the price skyrocketed and then it crashed, right? And so he was saying, well, that is not the case for Bitcoin because we went through this bubble, but then the price continued to go up. This was several months after that. And it will continue to go up. And in fact, it follows, this is what he claimed, an exponential. And I thought, because I was a lot of these technology trends, like, Moore's law, how computational power increases, how the time to, to create like a full genome for a particular species is decreasing with time in an exponential fashion. All these things follow exponential. I was very excited because I felt, okay, maybe this is another pattern that follows an exponential. And so I wanted to understand it mathematically. I started to study it and didn't look at an exponential to me. But I recognized that there was some kind of organization and order in Bitcoin that was different from other assets. And this is when I started to actually study Bitcoin. It's basically a 12 years journey. I know that people think the power law is a new thing, but it's not. Because so actually soon later, I saw this video that actually I suggest everybody to look on the internet. It's called The Surprising Math of Cities and Corporations. So it's a video by this physicist. His name is Jeffrey West. He also wrote a book that is called Scale. So if anybody wants to go deep in the rabbit hole, I suggest to watch this video.
Could you say it one more time? What was it called?
The video is called The Surprising Math of Cities and Corporations. Okay, and you can maybe put it in the chat so people can.
The Surprising Math of CTs Corporations, you said?
Yes, I can find the link for you if you want.
Here.
Let
me put it in the private chat. Let me make sure here. Look in the private chat. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
No, Math, M-A-T-H. M-A-T-H.
Oh, M-A-T-H.
The Surprising Math of Cities.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for my accent. You know,
no, that's all right.
I train my Italian accent every single day. I do it on purpose. You know.
So funny.
Yeah,
right,
of cities, not city, but cities.
Yep, cities.
Yeah,
like that.
Yes, yeah, like plurals of cities, right?
Actually, probably can pull it up on YouTube here.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me just double check. That's right, correct?
Mm-hmm. Cities, the plural cities.
Cities. Okay, perfect. Let me type this in. See if we can pull this up here. All right. And all right, a bunch of TED Talks are coming up. Is that right?
Right, exactly. So find the one on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll pull it up on the screen. See if you find it. See if you see it. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Is it one of these? 13 years ago?
Yes, correct. That is the guy.
There it is. Okay, so I'll pull this up for later, but just for anyone who wants to check it out, if you're interested, just type in surprising math of cities and corporations.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
So I saw this video, and he's talking. So West, right? Dr. West is a physicist. He's the director of this institute. He's from England, but he's the director of at least an higher up in this institute that study. It's called the Santa Fe Institute. It's in New Mexico, and they study what we call in physics complex systems. So that are systems that are not easy to explain with the normal type of physics that we use, or you have to use other tools. They are called complex because they are, very non-linear in their behavior. Like so, if you have a small input, the response can be large, and you have to have tools that can deal with the complexity of the behavior, because it's not as you will see something very complicated up, like for example the patterns that you observe in weather, right? So you can have a small little change in temperature in somewhere in some location, and then this small change multiplies, get iterated, and then you can have a storm somewhere many miles away, right? So this type of system, or another example could be an avalanche. You see all this snow that is not doing anything. You go there, you clap your hands, and that little change, that is created by you clapping with your hand, or screaming or say something, creates a big, huge effect. That is the avalanche itself, right? So these are things that physicists started to study recently in the last 30, 40 years, and we develop all these tools to deal with them. One of the things that is very common in these systems that are complex systems is the fact that even if they are complex at first glance, like for example Bitcoin, right? It seems a complex type of system where many people interact. Some people sell, buy. There are news. There are bans from China. There are all kind of different things happening all the time, all around it, right? So you will think it's a very complex system, and it is. A lot of these complex systems, when you actually look at the right angle, they seem very simple and orderly. You can find a simple and orderly behavior that it's revealed with the right tool. And it's amazing because how would you explain? That is one, I think, one of the resistance that people have with the power law. They think, how can a simple line or equation or whatever can explain something as complex as Bitcoin? I don't know, ask nature, because nature does this over and over again. And one example, this is why the title of that presentation. So I was telling, I saw that presentation, and the presentation is about the relevance of these one of the simple things that appear in this complex system, that is this thing called a power law. This is the relevance, right? The power law is, when you look at, this is why I'm saying you have to look at the right angle. When you look at these systems and you look at one of it, there are many different things you can do, but one very important angle is to look at them in terms of the change in the scale. This is why, right, the title is The Surprising Math of City Corporation. What is the math? It's the math of the power laws. This is what it doesn't tell you until you listen to the lecture, but the lecture is all about that. And then he has a book that is called Scale, because scale is really what you derive from the power law. And that is the angle that you want to use to understand this phenomenon. So what is scale? Scale is when you look at something that you're studying, we call it a system in physics, a Bitcoin, a forest, an avalanche, right? A mountain with a lot of snow, the weather, etc. These are systems. It's almost like a system in physics is when you put like a little boundary around whatever you want to study and say, I'm going to study this thing. And the system can interact with other things outside the system, but your focus is on this particular thing that you decide you want to study, you want to understand. In our case, right? In my case, I call myself a Bitcoin scientist. My system is Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin, of course, can interact with the world, etc. But Bitcoin is my system. So when you're focusing on the system, you look at some property of the system. For example, the price and time. You know how the price evolves in time. But you can look at price and addresses. For example, we have all this very interesting information from the blockchain. We have a lot of different data. We have a hash rate. We have addresses. We have transaction volumes on chain. So much information. Then we can look at how they interact with each other, right? So one of the things I was telling you when I listened to this talk that I derived from listening to the talk was not about the power laws, because power laws, every physicist, if he doesn't know about power laws, he's not a physicist. We encounter them all the time. One time I found a shirt online that said, just to tell you how common this idea of power law is, he said, I went to a physics conference, all what I got was a lousy power law. So we are a little bit too enamored with these power laws, because a lot of phenomena are actually power laws in physics. Like, the motion of the planets is a power law. Gravity is a power law.
Well, I think that's something people don't think about, because they only really hear it in crypto and Bitcoin land as just the Bitcoin power law. They're not thinking that power law extrapolates into something wider. I think that's one of the distinctions that a lot of people miss, actually. So that's really interesting you say that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I didn't invent the term. It's a very common term. It's the term that we use in the field. But then, the beauty of that lecture that I suggest everybody to watch, it's very short, and Jeffrey West is an incredible speaker, is very eloquent, and he brings the concept in a very lively way, a meaningful way for people. And when was very excited when I saw that talk, because I was familiar with the power laws, but his life experience that he also explains in the book Scale, that if you want to go deeper, that is the next thing you should do. Read that book. People always tell me how amazing that book is. So it's actually a pretty enjoyable book to read. When you go deeper, you realize that it's not just natural phenomena like the motion of the planets, but then Jeffrey, even in his personal life, in his journey, he started to go from the natural world of, let's say particles and so on, then to animals and biology. So he started to apply some of these tools and principles, like kind of did when I went to neuroscience. In fact, I did use power laws to understand or describe some neuroscience phenomena. And then he started to see these power laws emerging in many different important phenomena. One, he didn't come up with, but is an example of how you can use power laws in biology. For example, there is a famous relationship where you look at the weight of an animal, the mass of an animal, and how much energy it consumes. So maybe we can go deeper in that to give an example of how it is applied in general and the relevance. If you like, do people can see the screen? If
They
we
can
share,
yeah, absolutely. Do you want to pull something up?
So I'm sharing. I'm going to share some.
Sure. Hit share screen. Hit present down in the middle, and then share screen. And then up to you. I usually just do the entire screen because that's the easiest, or maybe window.
Yeah.
Once it pops up,
I will show you different examples of power laws, so we can explain better what power laws are in general. I'm looking for the right slide. I think it's this one. Yes. So I'm going to share it.
All right, I see it.
Okay.
And there we go.
And we can try to make it
very
a
nice.
bit bigger.
Yeah, maybe just zoom in a little bit, maybe. Yeah. If possible.
Yes. So, so here are many different examples, but I do want to talk about this particular one. And then we can look at the others. But this one, the one that I was mentioning, that is the relationship here on the left, this one. So it's the relationship between the mass of an animal and how much energy the animal consumes. So what are the things to consider in this graph? It will make us understand what power laws are. The first one is notice how the emphasis here on the scale, it's in terms of these factors or multiples of 10, right? You see how we go from 0.01, right? Then we go up by a factor of 10, 0.1, then 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. So this is the scale. The scale is when you're looking at phenomena, instead of focusing on the small changes, you're looking at the large changes. It's almost like, imagine I have a drone, I am inside a forest, I'm lost because I see all these trees. I don't know how to understand what is going on. And then I take a drone, I make it fly above the forest, above the canopy of the forest, and little by little, I'm taking pictures of the forest every time I go up by a factor of 10, right? So 1 meter above the forest, 10 meters, 100 meters, 1,000 meters, 10,000 meters. Every time I take a picture, and I see how the forest grows, how the shape of the forest, of the structure of the forest, and I see and try to see if there is something that demonstrates some kind of a pattern, some kind of regularity. And in this case, we do exactly that, right? We take the mass of the animal, and then we go up, right? Imagine, in a sense, I know that looks like many different animals, but you can think almost like the living organism, right? That is your system, right? You're putting, so these different examples of how organism can, we use the term scaling up. It's scaling up, right? It's going how when you go, because it's basically the same principle, right? Even if the animals are so different, the physiology and the DNA, how the evolutionary forces are all similar, right? There is something in common, some kind of a mechanism that is relevant to all of them, right? So you can consider it like one single system, right? Made of many different examples. So as you grow and you look at different type of animals that are governed by the same physiology, but we have different sizes, you see there is a pattern, because as they grow, you will imagine there is more energy consumption. That makes sense, right? Because they have more cells, they need to use more energy, right? They need to eat more food. But you will think initially, if somebody didn't show you this chart, that it's going to be all over the place. Yes, maybe there is some direction, right? But it will be surprising that an elephant eats less than a mouse. You will expect that it's more, right? But the fact that it follows a very precise pattern, it's surprising. It's worth of a scientific discovery, right? This actually is named after the discoverer. It's called the Kleber's law. These power laws are so important, and when somebody discovers, usually they are named after that. The discovery is named after the person that discovered. Because we have a lot of them in nature, but usually, when you find them, they are very important. They reveal some kind of very important principle, very important mechanism that organizes all these events, right? All these instances of physiology in this case. And also it's counterintuitive, because the first thing you will think, okay, maybe there is some kind of order, and the order you can come up, right? If you really think about it, maybe you have a scientific mind, you will think, I double the size of the organism and I'm going to double the energy consumption, right? So I'm going to see some kind of linear relationship, right? You double the mass, you get double the energy. And instead, it's not that. So it looks like a straight line, but that is the other thing that needs to be understood when people try to understand the Bitcoin power law. It's a straight line in this very strange space. This is how the terminology we use. That is the log space. What do I mean? Really, the fact that I'm showing jumps in terms of factors of 10, it means here, really what I'm doing here, I'm looking at the log of a mass. And what I'm doing on the y-axis, I'm taking the log of the energy, right? Here the energy is expressed in watts. I could do it with calories or whatever, but watts is the typical physics and unit for energy. So what the log does, the log is a mathematical quantity that extrapolate that scale. Because, for example, if I have a number that is 100, I can express that number 100 as 10 to the 2, right? It's basically multiplying 10 two times, right? 10 times 10 gives you 100, or you can write it, what is called a scientific notation, as 10 to the 2. Whenever I use a scientific notation in my graph, like, for example, you see here on the right, that is Bitcoin, the example, the relationship is also power law. I'm using the scientific notation, and people tell me, why don't you use real numbers? They are real numbers. It's just another way of expressing it. But for a scientist, is very familiar. Maybe for the average person, it's not. But it's not difficult to understand. 10 to the 2 means 10 multiplied 2 times, so it gives you 100. 10 to the 3 means 10 multiplied 3 times, so it gives you 1,000. 10 to the 4 is 10,000, and so on, right? A million will be 10 to the 6. You multiply 10 times 10, 10, 10, 6 times a million. The beauty of writing it in that way, that if you apply the log to it, then the log base 10, but it's a technical thing, it doesn't matter. So you apply the log to that number, it gives you that exponent. So if the log of 100 will be 2, basically because the exponent is 2, right? That little number is called the exponent. So if the log of 10 to the 3 or 1,000 will be 3. The log of 10 to the 4 will be 4, right? And that is something that actually many people use it in many different situations. Like, for example, when we have earthquakes, right? When we have earthquakes, we say, oh, this earthquake is scale 3, this earthquake is scale 4. It's really what we mean that 3 and 4 is the exponent, that the earthquake is 10 to the 3, and the scale 4 is 10 to the 4. So the earthquake scale 4 is actually 10 times bigger than the one scale 3. Our eyes, for example, work in that way. We don't know, we are not aware, but when we go outside, the light outside is many, many times bigger than what we feel it is, because our eyes work in this way. We look at the scale. So if a light looks like, let's say, I will say, oh, here the light is 2. When I go outside, I say, it's kind of maybe 2 times more bright, but 2 times brighter. Well, it's actually many times, maybe 100 times brighter, because it's not 2, it's 10 to the 2, it's 100 times. Our eyes are built in that way. We don't know because, we are not aware of it, but when scientists studied it, they figure out that it responds in this log fashion. And when you do that, then you take the log of one quantity and the log of another. This is one of these tools that we use to study complex systems. And it's that particular angle that allows you to see the order where you will not be able to see it if you don't use that angle. And the order in this case, like for the animals, is this beautiful straight line. Now, a straight line in this log-log graph, it's not a straight line in a linear graph. So if I showed you only directly the mass and the energy, it will look bent. It will look a curve like this. It will look like it's bending down in a sense. And the reason why that happens is because the relationship really, and this is what a power law is, the relationship, let me see if I have a graph for that. It's here. So the relationship that define a power law is this, where you have one quantity y is equal to some constant. It doesn't matter. It's not that important. But what is important is the other quantity x. So in our case, it will be the price and the time, for example. And then there is some kind of exponent. And that exponent, it's first of all, it makes this relationship non-linear unless n is 1, that is basically linear is a particular case of a non-linear. And so that n, it's kind of a DNA for the phenomena, because it tells us something deep about what is going on with the phenomena. And we will return to our example. I will show you what is the relevance of that number for animals, for example. In the case of Bitcoin, this constant A is a very, very small number, and there is a reason for that, because basically when X is 1, you go all the way to 1, 1 to anything is always 1. And so you get left only with the constant. So basically these very small numbers is the price of Bitcoin when it was 1 day. That is 0 with 16 zeros, $1, right? So it was worth nothing, right? Basically, that is the idea. So we started with Bitcoin worth of basically almost nothing to 100,000 today. And then this X, in our case, is the number of days from, you can use years, you can use seconds, but we usually use days from when Bitcoin was created. And then you raise it to the power. How do you get this power? I will tell you in a second. But we derive that for Bitcoin, that it's called power or exponent. So this is why it's called a power law, because that little number is a power or an exponent. So if a relationship of this kind, where you have one quantity related to another, to some kind of a power, then you have a power law. And this is why Bitcoin is a power law, because it turns out that a lot of the behavior, it sounds incredible, right? Because say you found a formula for Bitcoin, you found a simple little formula that you can write in a line that is supposed to represent Bitcoin behavior over many years. Yes, I did. And this is what it is. This is what the power law is, right? It's this simple, very, very, very simple formula. And you can see it's a power law because we have this power of 5.83. So if I go, do you have any question at this particular point?
Actually, so not specifically on what we just said, but one thing creeps in my head of like, there was a guy who, this is totally off base, but it relates back to this a lot. There was a Catholic who said, I don't remember what it was with the specific, he said, basically, if this happens, Catholicism is like wrong. And he was like, because the claims of Catholicism are such. And I remember hearing, oh, wow, that's crazy, because that's a claim right there, a big time claim. If this goes back, basically there's something to do with the Pope. So I'm thinking, with power law, is there any thing where you're like, if this doesn't play out, then there's this has to just be wrong? Like, is there any point where that happens? Because I've heard this come up in conversation where they're like, in what case can we ever be in a situation where we say, okay, we got to think about this. We got to rethink something. Is there any case like this that comes to mind? Or is it like, how do you think about this when people bring this up?
Yeah, of course, right? So one thing you can, for example, right, imagine you came up with this idea, right? So we go to how the power law in Bitcoin looks like. like here, right in the center. That is the Bitcoin power law, right? And why I'm saying is a power law, because you see, this is what I was telling you before. If I plot the log of a quantity and the log of the other quantity and I see a straight line, it's not very difficult math, and anybody that has a little bit of math skills can try to show them for themselves. I can, if you DM me and you get stuck, I can show you. It's not difficult. If you have the type of relationship that we show, and then you take the log of y and the log of x, and then you plot these two quantity, any type of relationship that is of that type, where you have y equal x to the n, will look like a straight line. And the straight line slope, it's that power. So in our case, for example, when we measure the slope, right? So we look at these. So how do we come up? And we can discuss this very quickly, and then I do want to finish what I was telling you. Or maybe let me do this first, if you don't mind. Let me remember your question, and I will come back to your question, okay?
Okay.
Because I think it's better if I finish my discussion of this example first, and then we can see what is going on.
And by the way, for anyone who's listening, please give Giovanni a follow. If you're on Twitter, just click right above our faces, and you can click his name on Twitter. If you're on YouTube, right below our faces, give him a follow. And please retweet the stream if you're enjoying the conversation. This is really a deep dive. That was the whole point of this, was to go super nerdy down and all the way down into the rabbit hole. So again, Giovanni, thanks for coming on, man. This is fascinating. I think for anyone who wants to go high level.
And read, beside the Bitcoin power law or no, read that book Scale, because it's very beautiful. It shows how relevant this understanding of scaling is in life, right? That is the purpose of a book. It shows how we use this word universal. So it's very universal in the sense it covers many, many different phenomena, from animals to, see, this is part of the purpose of this slide. It applies to languages. It's applied to AI. For example, if you go and start to read some of AI expos, people talking about this scaling, of a training of AI, they talk exactly about this. They talk about power laws and how many, many phenomena in life follow this scaling principle, right? That the scaling happens in a very precise pattern. And you can find these in languages. This is why the title of that lecture is Cities and Corporations, because corporations are an exception. Corporations grow like exponential. And in fact, the lecture is trying to make a comparison between processes that follow exponentials and processes that follow power laws. Power laws have very beautiful properties, almost like if you didn't know that Bitcoin follow power law, and you say, if you are a scientist and you say, oh, I really care about Bitcoin, I hope it follows some kind of precise pattern. Which pattern should it be? You will immediately say it should be a power law because it has a lot of beautiful properties that we can discuss. But cities, for example, and that is one of the things that many people push back sometimes. They say, but okay, it applies to planets, it applies to animal, but people for sure cannot be described by math. Yes, they can be described by math. And in fact, one of the most important creations of humans that are cities, they can be described by power laws. In fact, many different properties like the GDP, the number of patents, the number of libraries, gas stations, the number of crimes, even bad things like crimes or even terrorist attack in a city, they follow power laws. How fast somebody walks in a city, it's a power law. So a lot of phenomena that are human can also be described by power law. And that is one of the things that is also discussed in that lecture that I mentioned and in the book Scale. And I was telling you, I saw that video just after I discovered Bitcoin, and the video was talking about cities as this living organism with circulatory system, with a nervous system, right? The communication system is the nervous system. The streets are the like the arteries of the cities. Like we use this analogy, but it's actually real, because that intricacy of a streets, etc., how things communicate and they are transported from one place to another of a city is actually what generates the power law. All these iterative processes, if you go deep in the rabbit hole, you find out, oh, power laws are created by iterations, and this is why you will expect actually a city that is a bunch of people interacting with each other and having physical limitation, they produce power laws. And the same thing, this is why I call it a theory, I think applies to Bitcoin. And in fact, when I saw that video, I immediately had this vision of Bitcoin being like these cities that Jeffrey West was describing. And I finished to watch the video and immediately downloaded all the on-chain data, and I started to explore it to look if there were power laws. And guess what? I found my first power laws. I found a power law between price and addresses, price and transactions, and so on. It took me much longer to find these between price and time, because I was, many times when you explore things, you have like preconceived ideas. I was thinking that the addresses, okay, there is a relationship between price and addresses that is a power law, but maybe the addresses grow like a technology adoption curve, this S curve, that by the way is exponential. So I was making model based on that. And then I got frustrated, and finally I found that even the growth in time of addresses, hash rate, and price are all power laws in time. This was 6 years ago. But to finish what I was discussing about this graph and also addressing your question, the slope of this line tell us about the important relationship in question, right? I was telling you it's natural to think that is a linear relationship where you double the size of the animal, you get 2 times the energy, right? That is the first guess that you will have. And it will not be a too bad of a guess, but then you compare your hypothesis with reality, and it turns out the curve actually it's slower. So instead of being 1, that will make it a linear relationship, the exponent is 3/4. That is less than 1, right? What is the beauty of that is there are immediate consequences. That number tells you how these things works, how this relationship works. Why? Because if I double the size of an animal, I'm expecting, right, logically at least, first, my intuition. This is how it shows many times we use our intuition, and then our intuition is wrong. And then reality works in a different way. We learn something from the reality, right, doing experiments, studying, using the scientific method. And then we're trying to build a new type of intuition based on what nature tells us, right? In this case, it's telling that somehow evolution find a way of saving energy, because if you double the animal, you take 2, this is how it works, right? You scale it by a factor of 2, you take the power 3/4, and you get 1.7. So basically you have a discount in energy by 30% by doubling the animal. So the animal, yes, consume more energy, but less than what our intuition will tell us, about 30% less. Now, by the time we go all the way from the mouse to the elephant, you can see from the chart, right, is about, let's approximate 10,000 kilograms versus the mouse, that is, maybe 0.1. So it's about 1,000 times bigger. So you will think we will need 1,000 times more energy, but actually, 10 times 0.1, 100,000 more energy, 100,000 more energy, but it turns out the energy consumed is only 10,000 more when you apply this law. That means a discount of 10. So by the time you go all the way to the elephant, you save 10 times more energy. The elephant will have to eat 10 times more energy if it was simply a linear relationship between the two. And instead, somehow, nature, through evolution, through different processes, and this is what interests scientists. Once you found this, when you say, wow, where that comes from? Let me go even deeper. Let me try to understand it. What is going on in the animals that makes them save energy as they grow? So I can learn a lot of things about this phenomena by just discovering this relationship. This is why these relationships are so important. you don't stop there. You say, oh, look, I found this. You go deeper, right? And so the elephant will almost not exist. He will not have, they are already eating all the time, spend most of their day eating stuff. They will not exist if you had to eat even 10 times bigger. So large animals like this will not exist. So basically, yes, there is a trade-off between becoming bigger and being avoiding certain predators, and maybe heat issues and other things like that. But the price you have to pay is not that steep, because there is some kind of organization, some kind of mechanism that is going on. And if you read the book, they explain it to you, and it's really amazing. It has to do a lot of, in fact, with how the body organizes, because the body is a network, right? And very similar to the idea of a city, there are vessels that distribute the energy around the body, etc. And that can be optimized, and this is how you get less energy consumed. So it's very important in exploring this phenomena, in understanding that exponent. And so when I try to do the same thing with Bitcoin, and the first thing is, how do I know it's a power law, right? I know because even if I don't draw this red line in the middle, that we just say if there is a straight line in a log graph, it's a power law. I look at the graph, right? Now many people are kind of used of seeing this graph and seeing Bitcoin straight, but were you not surprised when you saw this video when this graph for the first time? I was surprised. I almost fell from the chair, because all of a sudden there is order and there is organization, right? Otherwise, if you look at Bitcoin in other ways, right? For example, the typical chart that people show, if you do it completely linearly, right? And you take the price versus the time, and you don't take the log of anything, it looks like this, right? But it's not very organized. It doesn't, okay, yes, it's going up, but okay, it's also crashing down very quickly, etc. Many people will not want to invest in something like that, right? Because it doesn't look like there is a very precise organization. And then, right, there is the graph where we put it in, we take the log of the price, and now, yeah, it looks like there is some kind of a pattern, but people saw this pattern for many years and they didn't recognize it. They didn't say, yes, it has to do with very, very precise behavior that is found in nature everywhere. It took me to come and start to tell people what it is. And the trick is to take the log, right? So you see how we go from this thing that is a curve, and it looks like there is maybe some kind of a pattern, but it's difficult to say what pattern it is, right? Our brain doesn't look at a pattern like that and say, whoa, there is something very organized there, right? It's curious, it's interesting, and maybe you can try to fit some kind of a curve, but it's very arbitrary, right? If you start to fit a line through this data and you associate it with some particular formula, it's arbitrary, because actually there are theorems in math that says, you give me any curve, any phenomenon at all, any any behavior in a chart, I can always find some kind of approximation using a bunch of exponents, right? If you have x to the square, x to the cube, x to the 4, you add, you can actually mimic anything, including the peaks, including the noise, everything. The beauty of doing it with the power law is that it's simple. That is one single equation with one single exponent. And when you find that, probably what you found is real, because in nature, in science, when we explore these things, we look always for the simplest possible explanation. If there is a simple formula that can, with one single equation, explain a lot of a phenomena, probably is true, because we have done that over and over again, and it turned out to be true, that there is some kind of, that things don't happen by chance, that organization, that straight line behavior that you're seeing here, forget about the line, but the fact that there is some very precise organization over time is something meaningful and important. And then the fact that, in addition, it's a power law, so it's not any other a simple equation. It's a power law, and this power law are universal, makes you very confident that you are into something, that there is something deep in what you are exploring here. So that is the idea. That is what makes power laws so different from everything else. And this is an example of a city that I was telling you before. If you take the log or whatever quantity you want, right? Here we're looking at crime, GDP, income, patents, right? So we're looking at all these different quantity. They normalize it such way that you can compare different things. But the pattern is the same. You see, it's a power law. It's a straight line. It's a fuzzy power law, right? It's never.
Sure.
Reality is never going to be a perfect straight line. It's going to be fuzzy, right? Because there is.
Is it possible to zoom in on that a little bit or make it a little bit bigger?
Sure. So this is when you deal with reality, you never get 100% behavior, right? Is going to be always some error, some fuzziness, some freedom. That is I'm going little by little towards answering your question, right? There is some freedom allowed there, right? Because after all, we are dealing with people, we are dealing maybe with different nations, or different policies, that are applied. That is the point. Yes, a policy, maybe this city is a little bit of an outlier, right? They have more patents than anybody else. Okay. What is going on with this city? Which city it is? Maybe it's a capital, right? The capital will be better, or maybe it's in the United States versus, these are all United States, but that city has something special where there are more patents, right? It doesn't follow completely on the line, and so it's an outlier. But everything else does, right? And that is just one exception that confirms the rule, right? The rule is that you follow this pattern. In particular, as you go to bigger and bigger city, you see that a pattern emerges. That is the way you want to think about these kind of things, right? But the pattern is there. Now, with the planet, if I did this with the planet, it will be as close of a perfect straight line as you can imagine. Even there is little deviations due to the influence of each planet on each other. It's more complicated, but it's much more linear, right? It's much more organized. And with the animal, that is the example that we use, you see there is some deviation, right? The elephant maybe is consume more. If you are above that line, means you consume a little bit more energy than you should relatively to your size. And maybe there is a reason for that, right? Look at the man. Man consumes a little bit more than a woman. There is a reason for that. You're looking at birds, like small birds, they are a pretty strong outlier. You see how they are much higher than the general line. And one of the reasons, and so one can ask questions, right? What is going on with the small birds? Probably because they are flying, and so they pay another price for flying, right? So they actually consume more energy than they should given their weight, right? But they get the flight as an additional property of these animals, right? And so this is how you approach these deviations, for example, with Bitcoin, right? You see these big deviations from the trend because it will be much more impressive if all the dots were aligned. And if it was just a fuzzy power law, it's not just fuzzy, it has also this very, very large deviation. That is, I think it's also part of what confuses people, right? That they say, well, okay, yes, in general, we follow this straight line. And the straight line is not me drawing it by hand. You calculate it, use what is called the regression. And there are many methods of doing the regression. But it calculates this line that is supposed to represent kind of like an average behavior, right? It goes through the majority of this point. It's kind of, some of them are above, some of them are below, but in general represents the general trend, right? If you imagine, if had somebody made a post and say Giovanni and he's, the people that work with him, at a certain point there was this guy, he's a computer scientist, and he saw my early post. I did a post with a graph very similar to this one, but it was in 2018. And so you can imagine it's much earlier, right? We were just coming down. In fact, we didn't even have, this was a 2018. yeah, so we didn't have the last cycle, right, yet. And so imagine going back to that date and see how this graph looked like. And the guy that saw, his name is H.C. Berger, he thought I was an idiot. He thought this graph is impossible where Bitcoin looks like straight like this. You did something wrong, right? You did some mistake. And he was going to answer me and humiliate me already. You know how Reddit is, right? Very critical. And so he was going to destroy me. When he, to do that, he had to show where I went wrong. And then he replicated the result. And he was shocked. And he was so shocked that he decided to actually to write a Medium article. And he was one of the people that actually, he pushed the, for some time, people were thinking that he was the author of the power law. And, it became not as popular as S2F, but, he pushed the topic, right? And one of the things he did actually made a prediction of how it's going to look like in several years from now. And he just posted like a few days ago that said, look, my prediction using Giovanni's model came out completely true. We are following that pattern that was without changing anything, without changing parameters, because that is another thing that a lot of people do. They change, they make predictions, and the prediction doesn't come up well, and they change the parameter of the model a little bit to make it work with the new data. We don't do that. It's not necessary because it works at all the scale. That is the entire idea. So his prediction of 6 years ago using my model turned out completely right. And so the idea is that, this red line will represent some kind of an average price for the Bitcoin value. And now, it's important to also to understand that there are these deviations. There are these large deviations. It's not just fuzziness around the line. It's something more, right? There are these very precise oscillations. These are what we call the bubbles, right? And now we have to understand this bubble, what they play a role. And that kind of goes towards your question. We are almost there, I promise. You see, the bubbles, in a sense, they are a test of these going away from the power law, because many people say, what will it take for breaking the power law or not following the power law? Well, my answer is we already saw that. Every single time that we see a bubble, one of these bubbles, we kind of left the power law path. You see how, for example, look at this bubble. We went in a completely different direction. We started to leave it, right? And you actually can measure that deviation, and you can say, well, right, yeah, sure, for some time here, and usually takes actually 1 year. Every single time we left the power law, it took about 1 year to reach the top. It's for 1 year, we are leaving the power law. We are not behaving like the power law anymore. The cool thing, though, it turns out that every single time we went back to the power law. And that is what needs to be understood, because it's a little bit complicated and just a fuzzy power law. But it's fascinating and interesting at the same time. I can show you, actually, I have some graph where you can see how extraordinary that thing is, if I find it. And in the meanwhile, so to answer your question, right, to bring it finally back home and answer your question, we have many opportunity to see, for example, this is what I'm illustrating here, right? We left the power law. These dots here, blue dots, they are not just drawn by me by hand. I'm using this mathematical method where I'm looking for large deviations statistically. And then, these are called the inliers. And then I look for the outliers that are this large deviation. And you can see they are the bubbles. So there is really, we think, after going deeper in the rabbit hole, that the real power law is really this power law that we found at the bottom. The bottom, you can draw a line that touches all these bottoms. And there are some very precise reasons. We think that has to do with the cost of production of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin being not just an asset, but also an algorithm, and it has physicality that other assets don't, because it needs energy to be produced, right? Many people mention that, but where is the proof that actually that is relevant? Here it is, the fact that there is this bottom line, and we have we have done studies showing that actually is related to the hash rate, is related to the cost of production of Bitcoin. And so you create this natural floor. And then we leave that floor. We take 1 year to go. And in that year, you could think, well, finally we broke the power law, right? In fact, many people try even to say that right now, because we are slightly above the power law, oh, we are leaving the power law. No, we have done it many times so far, right? 4 times. It goes up to a point, and then it comes back. Now, if we find a situation where that is similar to this, where we go exponential, because a lot of this leaving the power law becomes exponential. So it doesn't grow anymore like a power law, but an exponential. It is another type of curve. The difference between a power law and an exponential is that an exponential has a constant rate of growth, right? So for example, like your bank account, let's say your bank account gives you 3% every year, right? If you keep the money there, this is not a good idea. I will buy Bitcoin, doesn't make any sense to do savings. But if you have 3% a year and you compound it every year like this, eventually it will become an exponential. The power law, it has diminishing returns. So it starts very fast, and then little by little, if you calculate, for example, with Bitcoin, initially we had 2 or 3 times returns every year. Right now, according to the power law, it's 42%. So it goes down. The growth is not constant every single year. It's not a constant. It goes down. It has these diminishing returns that some people don't like. But it's actually a feature, not a bug. And I can explain you this in a moment if you like. But what I'm trying to say here, if you were leaving the power law and then never come back, right? So let's say in one of these bubbles, we started to go exponential, we left the power law, and then we never come back. Then, yes, that will be evidence of it. We left, we are not behaving like a power law anymore. But part of the beauty and mystery of this behavior is that it happened already 4 times, and every single time we went back to the power law. Because how can you explain, right, that we leave a power law, we reach this very large deviation, and then we go back, and where did we go? To the power law, right? We could have stopped anywhere, right, and continue from that point. But we always go there. That is the incredible thing about this phenomena, right? That needs to be understood. Why we go there? What is going on, right? It's really, because as you study this thing, you explore all this idea, and it's really fascinating, right? It's one of these things that even as me being the person that is maybe knows more than anybody else about the power law, I'm still amazed about this phenomenon. Right? There are many times where I'm asking myself, what is going on? Why we are going back to that line? I'm trying to find some graph. In fact, even this other graph, right? Even when we had COVID, right? So you see here is COVID. We had a major correction of the price. We arrived to that red line, and we bounced back, right? So this is another example, because people mention things like black swan events, right? Where, okay, what happens if there is a major event? So what happens is, and you can have black swan down, right, where the price corrects. This is an example. And then you have correction up, where the price leaves the power law for whatever reason, right? Maybe there is an announcement where there are ETFs. Right now, for example, in this cycle, we saw that we were supposed to be much closer to the bottom, and then we left that bottom because of a FOMO created by the ETFs. But then what happened? We reached that middle line. We had a correction, right? Major correction that time when we went from 72 to 55K. We actually reached the power law, and we had a correction. And so, these are some of the things that you start to see, that you have like a framework to put the beauty and the significance of finding the power law. It's not just like some kind of a straight line, some kind of fitting that maybe tell us a little bit about what it maybe can be the price of the Bitcoin. It really gives you a framework, right? It puts Bitcoin in the context of these complex phenomena. And then there is all these tools, this language, this understanding about how things scale up when you are a complex phenomena, because there are so many other examples. And one of these examples, again, around your question is not that it's impossible for something to push away, to happen to Bitcoin. Like people mention, okay, what about a strategic reserve? What about this? What about that? Well, the idea is that if a theory is correct, that Bitcoin, for some reason, some deep reason, some mechanism, right, similar to how animals are organized or how cities grow as GDP, right? You can have that outlier. You see, we mentioned there is an outlier. What is going on? But and the bubbles are outliers, right? But in general, the pattern will go back to the general trend, right? But in that case, are many instances of the same thing, right? In this case, the price are these many different instances, right? So some price or some sequence of price, like the bubbles, can go out of the behavior, but then because of a fundamental mechanism on how Bitcoin works, how it interacts with the world, how it interacts inside in terms of the fact that we are a network, right? What this suggests is that Bitcoin is a network, and that is its main characteristic, the way that people relate to each other. Like, for example, the fact we have here on Friday afternoon, instead of going and drinking a beer with friends, etc., we are talking about Bitcoin. That is an incredible thing that many other financial systems don't have. They don't have passionate people like us, interested people like us, that are basically kind of giving our life to Bitcoin, right? That creates a very strong social network. And network are known, weirdly enough, to have also power law properties. The way that we call them nodes and links, right? The nodes in a network are the individual component, right? The computers in a network, the cells in the body, the people in a social network. These are called nodes. And then there are the interaction between them that are called links. And there are many studies showing both the nodes and links in a social network. The people took real, I have this paper that I wrote an article around this paper because I tried to reproduce the same results but with Bitcoin. They shows they took WeChat, Weibo. It's the scholars that wrote the paper were Chinese, so we took Chinese examples of social networks, and they show that the number of people in the network grow with the power law, the nodes, and the connection between them also grows as a power law. And when you look at Bitcoin, the addresses are the nodes, because it's kind of proportional to the number of users. It's a measure of the activity of the network, and it follows a power law. It's a power law with the cube. And then you look at how price reacts. In price, it turns out there is this other network scholar that is called Metcalfe, and he came up with this principle that says the value of a network is proportional to the number of links. And in if everybody is connected with everybody else, it's kind of an ideal case. The number of link will be the square. With Bitcoin is 1.8, because the relationship between the price, that is the value of a network, and the addresses is 1.8. It's a power law with 1.8. And so you see where that 5.8 number comes from, because that is the first thing that you have to ask yourself, right? And this is what I did. Sometimes I could not even sleep, thinking, where the heck that 5.8 comes from with Bitcoin? That is the slope of a price versus time, right? And then I started to go deeper, and I found that addresses in time is a power law. The price, that is, this second one was one of the first power law I found all the way in 2012, but I didn't know how to put it in the context. Is the relationship between price and addresses. That is a power law with 1.8. And so when you have a power law of a power law, right, because it goes like this, price is proportional to addresses to 1.8, but then the addresses grow with the cube, you multiply the exponents. And if you multiply these two exponents, you get something close to 5.8, right, within 1%. And so now we know why we have this power law, because of the adoption of Bitcoin is a power law, and the way the price responds to the adoption is also power law. And then the total result is this power law in time. And so again, what it could break. Every time, if a theory is correct, and so far as being correct, it's possible to break the power law by things like anything. It could be like the other day, I was trying to understand why. You see how here just before COVID, you see that bump there, right? You see that big bump there? And I was trying to, for a long time, I say, where that bump comes from. Because you see, look at this, right? It's almost like a bimodal behavior. We have 2 years where we stay close to this red line.
Yep.
Then we spend
Wow.
1 year up, right?
Yeah.
And I know it looks compact. It's an artifact of taking the log. But believe me, all these chunks are the same length, right? No, believe me, you can verify, but it's real. It's just, it looks like compacted like this because I can show you another graph if you want. I'm going to show you. And by the way, ask me a question before we go to this topic of our understanding the cycle. Go ahead. Sorry, because otherwise it looks like I'm just talking all the time.
I mean, I guess probably the most fascinating thing is just the, I feel like if you didn't watch the show or you hadn't listened to before, you might think it's just Bitcoin power laws, just the name we called it. But you're speaking a lot more like there are power laws to be found within the universe. Bitcoin is one of those things you can attach it to and follow. Seems to be following it so far. That's one thing I picked up. Probably the biggest thing, on a broader macro level, that's fascinating to me. It changes kind of the way I look at that theory, I guess, because I wasn't approaching it from that way. But I don't really have too many questions, honestly. This is pretty cool stuff. I feel like I feel like I'm in like a Harvard class, getting like a full education on this. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's this is why it's a big deal, because it's a framework, right? You're putting it in a different context. It's not just like a pretty line, through the data. It's not like another model. It's like a completely different way of understanding Bitcoin. Because basically, what it tells us? It tells us that Bitcoin is very similar to these other phenomena in the world, not nature. Because even a city, people think, oh, there are things done by humans and things done by nature, but we are part of nature, right? It's a manifestation of nature, right? A city, it's basically the end product of evolution, right? There are these animals that they started to build things, and and one of their product is a city, right? It's a natural phenomenon. There is no difference. It's just the level of complexity, right? The planets are ruled by simple laws, and things like city, there are a lot of interactions happening together. But one of the things that, the beautiful thing in nature, this is why you became a scientist, because you are fascinated by these things, that something complex like a city can be described by a very simple power law. What is going on? Why that is simple? Why something complex like a city, then something fundamental like the GDP, the number of patents, the number of libraries, etc. Things that you will think they don't follow a precise pattern, they do. What is happening there? I want to understand it, right? This is what the scientists do. Same thing with Bitcoin, something that is so complex. People buying it, selling it, people holding, people not holding, China bans, Trump, all these things. The final behavior is still something organized, right? Yes, sure, there are deviations, but then we go back to the general pattern and so on, right? So this is what I was showing you. Like you see, for example, we spend I'm using this tool that is called TradingView. By the way, if you have a TradingView account, I don't know if you have a TradingView account, I can send you these indicators. These are part of my Discord group. We have a Discord group where people join and they get they pay a subscription, but I will give it to you for free, because I like to work with the different influencers, and that is my thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain this idea to your audience. So send me your TradingView name after the call. But this TradingView unfortunately doesn't allow you to take the log of time. You can take only the log of price. Now, I have a version of that, so you can use some tricks and actually draw a straight line. You can draw the price as a straight line, but you have to use some tricks and some workaround to make it look like a straight line, right? But then it does look like a straight line. And here you see I'm adding these oscillations because it looks like I kind of exclude the first bubble because it looks like an anomaly, but then you can actually try to reproduce the entirety of Bitcoin behavior, including the bubbles, by introducing some kind of oscillation. The oscillations are not perfect in reproducing the behavior of a bubble, but we are basically showing that there is a particular periodicity, right? It is basically every 4 years. And then there is this floor that it seems amazing, right? We never go below this floor, you see? We are always confined by this floor, even during COVID, for example. But it's kind of a workaround. It's not a natural way that TradingView works. But you can still use the equations, the same equation. So when you plot it in what is called a log linear chart, where you have a log of a price and the time is linear, then you will get the typical curve, right? So this, instead of being a straight line, the power law will start to look curved. It's just an artifact of how this chart works. Otherwise, if I was taking the log of time, you will see this being a straight line. But it's basically the same power law, the same equation. And notice how I get this white line, that support that I mentioned before. You see how we get all the bottoms, right? It's not something I did by hand. I calculated mathematically. It has mathematical meaning. Now, what you observe also is that there are basically like almost two modes. There is a mode where we are below that blue line. So the blue line is the middle ground, right? It's kind of a compromise between the bubbles and that white line. So it's something that goes in between. But we spend 50% of the time, in fact, it turns out it's about 53% of the time below that blue line, and 47% above. And the 47% are these things that we call V bubble, right? So this when, for whatever reason, and it could be the fact that there is a lot of FOMO associated with the halving, right? Because this is usually happening after the halving. It could be something related to macroeconomic events. For example, there are graphs where you can show that these bubbles are somehow correlated with things like, for example, the PMI index or other liquidity index, right? Or manufacturing indexes. So microeconomics. It could be that Bitcoin during this time there is more liquidity available. The price is, trying to find a way of doing something different that he has done before. He wants to leave a power law. And these systems, because once you start to go deeper and read about these complex systems, they have a lot of similar characteristics, right? So by the way, I do have, if people want, beside the book scale, if you want to go a little bit deeper, there's also this very beautiful book that is called How Nature Works, right? And is the science of self-organized criticality. So this is another name for this type of systems. They are called self-organized. So they have some mechanism where they organize themselves, and they are critical. Critical means they are in between chaos and order. This is what's another beautiful analogy for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is always associated with this being on the edge between order and disorder. And this when, in our experience, because if you look at the book, it's full of power laws. Like, look at this. I just opened it randomly, power law.
No way, are you serious?
No, because it's all about power laws.
It's just the one page open to big fat power law.
Right. There are a lot of examples of power laws because power law is the language of these systems that are self-organized criticality. And criticality is a word that has to do with, I gave you some example, right? The avalanche, right? The avalanche is there on the edge between something that looks orderly, like all the snow on top of the mountain, to something that looks crazy and chaotic, like the avalanche, right? That phenomena are called self-organized critical phenomena. And Bitcoin, if you understand it in this way, is this type of system. So this system can go to something different, right? When I push it slightly, and this is exactly what happened with the bubble. You push it, it adapts, and that is some of the nice property of Bitcoin, it can adapt to whatever it happens, right? So it wants to become exponential, it goes exponential. There are enough liquidity, there is enough FOMO and enthusiasm from people. They say, okay, let me try exponential. But then what happened? It's almost like a rubber band. You can stretch it, and it's elastic and it's stretchable. But then as you stretch it more and more and more, you get a stronger and stronger force that wants to go back, right? It's not that the experience with these kind of things. Yes, Bitcoin has well as elasticity to adapt to these things that want to push it away from this kind of balance between order and disorder. But then what? It will go back. See, because it's part of its nature. It wants to go back to that order. And so this is why once we reach a peak, we go down. And it takes about 1 year to do that. Then we go back to this regime, that is the green regime, that is when we are below the blue line. And we kind of follow, you see how we follow in a more or less parallel fashion the power law, the blue line, right? And we do it above and below. Now, there are times, so here, for example, this cycle, that it was like our first cycle after the halving, it was almost textbook example. We stay close to the power law, kind of confined between the blue line and the white line, and then we left it. It's a very fast transition, by the way. This is when the bull market starts. We go up, we went up, and then we corrected, and we went down. Now, the cycle after that, I always ask myself, because whenever I present this, I do my market updates, etc. I say, somebody needs to figure out what happened there. Like, there was something that made the price bullish when it was not supposed to be bullish, when we were supposed to spend these 2 years, because, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to find some regularity, some patterns that repeat themselves all the time. And this seems to something that broke. And I kind of promised myself that I was going to look it up and see what happened. And a few days ago, I think yesterday maybe, they show that China sold a bunch of coins, and they had a graph showing that was a spike in the price when this particular event happened, and people can look it up. It's called Plus Token. It was a scam, basically, but basically created a momentarily supply shock because a lot of people basically got involved in the scam. The coins were not circulating because we were all taken by these whoever criminal was doing this thing. So it created some kind of a supply shock, and the price responded to that. And because it's not that it doesn't respond to local things or interact, because that is one of the criticisms where people say, "Oh, you are not including the interaction with the external world." Yes, this is including. What is telling you, though, that yes, momentarily the price will deviate, and you see how we went above the power law. Then it doesn't want to stay there if it's not supposed to be there. And it corrected itself. It went back. Same thing with COVID. In this case, the price corrected very strongly from wherever it was. This is COVID. But it arrived there and it bounced back because it wants to be in this region that is in between these two lines. That is the corridor, right? And then same thing, it happened now. And here, so for example, again, is another instance where we didn't stay close to this support line. We left it. And we left it because this is much easier to understand what happened. It was mostly, the ETF coming online, putting a lot of cash in the system, the FOMO associated with that. But notice what happened. We reached the power law. We just touch it. And then we had a correction, you see. So, and now I predicted, you see, these are, if people follow me, they can testify these. Many months ahead, like I think it was all the way to March, I was telling people, come November of this year, because, these patterns are very predictable. We will start the bull market. I don't know if you know that I predicted that because somebody challenged me to some kind of a public bet. Many other influencers were there, Fred, Joe Calasar, everybody made a bet. And my bet was that on midnight of December 31st, 2024, the price was going to be 93,000. And I didn't make I guess I took the value of the power law, I added a little bit because I knew that the bull market will start during the time, and I went up with 93,000. Guess what the price was at midnight? I don't know if you remember. It was like 93,500 or something like that, right? So I was able to predict when the bull market will start, and kind of like the price, because this has been correct for so many years, from the beginning of Bitcoin history. And right now we are in this situation, right, where we are above a power law. Now, to be honest, if you compare it, because you have different graphs where I can show you this one. See here in this graph, I compare all the cycles, right? So I basically, what am I doing? I'm using the same understanding, right? We have two models. There is the power law, what we call the simple power law, that is basically the general trend, that is the white line here. Then we have a pink model that is, okay, I'm adding also the fact that we have these periodic oscillations, right? And we have a bottom. And it turns out that these oscillations over time, they are almost like sine waves, right? Not exactly, but these sine waves, the amplitude of the sine waves, they go smaller and smaller with time. There is a decay. Even that decay, that you will think that is completely arbitrary, follows a mathematical equation. It's actually an exponential. And they go down an exponential. So you kind of can predict if this decay, it's consistent, and it will continue to be consistent. That is the weakest part of all this discussion, right? Because we are leaving the simplicity and reliability of a power law to add all these other components. We do that often in science, right? When you study the projectile motion, you say, okay, I'm not going to consider air friction, the wind, etc., and then you add more and more stuff, right? Because if you want to really capture how a projectile, how cannonball goes through the air, you have to consider all these things. But it's almost like modular, right? You add all these modules one by one. As you add stuff, you kind of leave a simplicity and the predictability of a simple model, and you make things more complex. So as you add it, I will take it with less, with a grain of salt. But if you continue this progression, right, of adding more details, you kind of can predict scientifically where the next stop is going to be. That is basically the end of this year. It usually happen. You see how regular they are, right? Not exactly, right? This one happened a little bit before, this a little bit later, but usually is the quarter 4 of that 4th year. So my way of understanding the cycle is this: that we spend 1 year up. We kind of measure, in my convention, we measure the beginning of a cycle with the top. We use this clock terminology, like this is the 12 o'clock, the top. And you see, they kind of all, not exactly, so there is some uncertainty, like in everything, but within a few months, we're all kind of close to the end of the year of that year, right? When we have a exponential behavior. We go exponential up, exponential down for another year. That is where the bear market, the bottom is. It's kind of, they're all aligned very, very similarly. Then we spend about 2 years along this power law behavior, right? With sometimes deviations, and then the deviation correct themselves. This was the ETFs, right? So if you compare what is happening right now to previous years, because what I did here, basically, I'm going back 4 years, right? I'm showing you how this model looks like 4 years ago, right? So if I go here, I'm going back 4 years. Here, I'm going back 8 years. For some reason, I don't have 12 years. I should have 12 years. But 12 years, you can get it from here, right? This is what 12 years look like. But I don't know how to interpret this too much. And here I'm showing you, in this graph here, I'm showing you the deviations, right? So if I take the power law trend, something very clear, it's happening, right? You see there is a year where we go up, 1 year where we go down, and then the other 2 years we kind of oscillate, right? Here, it simply means you're following the power law. We are still going up, right? Because Right now, I told you we are going about 43% a year. Like previously, we were going even faster. But the fact that it's flat here means we are going along with power law, right? There is no a change relatively to the power law. And this blue line is the average of all the different cycles, right? You can see it's a clear pattern. And then at the end of these 2 years, we leave the power law and we are supposed to go much faster. And I'm a little worried because it's not time to say that we are not doing that this time, but I was expecting a little bit more aggressive movement. We need to go there, so we still have a year of time, and we are above the power law. That is a good sign, but it seems a little bit more muted than what it should be. But nothing to worry about, mostly because we are kind of ahead of time in a sense, because when we started to have this upward behavior, when we left this pink line because of ETFs, we kind of anticipated a little bit the move that usually it's confined to this, because you see last cycle, for example, right? Yes, we went above it and we had a correction. When we had a correction, it brought us all the way down to the support, and then it took time to recover, and then by the time the bull market started, we started to go very, very fast, right? Yes, there were some correction, but you see how steep it was, right? And same thing here. We started very bullish and we corrected, and but we kind of stay close to this support line, and then it started to go really fast up. So we could be kind of similar to this, where we are not ready yet to go faster. But just to give you an idea, if we follow the power law, right now we are doing it almost to a T, right? You see how, in fact, within 10%, we are basically following the power law. I can show you even better if I kind of zoom in, right? You see how we are following the power law. The power law is the white line. So we are going above, and we kind of almost touch it. We go above again. If we follow the power law all the way to the end of the year, that is usually when we have a peak for the cycle, we will reach about 135, something like that, by the power law alone, right? But it's not bad, right? It's still a lot of gain relative to where we are right now. But my projection based on how big the other peaks were and how they decay is that we should be closer to 200. And to go there, to be 200, right now we need to do something close to about 0.2% every day. And right now the power law itself is only 0.1. So basically we need to double the performance that we have observed in recent times. We need to catch up. We need to go faster. Not that fast, but a little bit faster to reach the 200K. So anyway, this kind of gives you a context of how significant the power law is, how to understand it in the general framework of these complex systems. So there is an entire terminology, there is an entire science that has studied this type of systems, and also how it is useful from, let's say, investor point of view, right? How to think it, how to use it. It allows us to know where we are in the cycle, but also make long-term predictions, because you have not asked me yet, because it's one of the questions that people ask me all the time, when we reach 1 million, when we reach 10 million, but I can tell you. So basically, according to the power law, if we continue along this path, it takes longer, right? Because the entire idea is that because we are scaling both the price and the time, in the beginning, it took few days to reach, a change in 10. Then it takes weeks, right, to get the next change in 10 in price. Then it took a year to go to the next change in 10. Well, now it's going to take a decade. So it's going to take another 10 years to reach the next change in 10, that is $1 million. So in 10 years from now, we are supposed to go to 1 million. And then it turns out to go to because it's not really a change of, it's, if you look at the calculations, etc., it's going to take another something like close to 20 years to reach $4 million. So that is how it's going. But the beauty of a power law is, in one end, yes, it's a slower process than many people would like, right? Because there are some people that would like to Bitcoin to go to 1 million within a couple of years, right? That is telling you, no, it's a much more, it's a process where you have to have a slow time preference, right? You have to be patient. But we're not talking about hundreds of years. We're talking about 10 years, right? And the other side is, because of these systems, they are both resistant to change up, where if you push it too much up, they want to correct. But like we saw with COVID, the other aspect is the other way around. If you're trying to push it too down, it wants to correct up. Bitcoin always go up. And that is one of the reasons when people say, oh, numbers go up, right? The power law is the mathematical reasons for that. It's not just a saying, but it's something beyond it, some mechanism. Because in the end, why physicists are interested in power law is because we are interested in causes and mechanisms, right? So there are mechanisms that make Bitcoin work internally, but also externally with the world, where everything happens in this proportional fashion, and it's basically a train that you cannot stop, right? I didn't come up with this expression. Leon Alden did, right? It's a train, you cannot stop this train. Once it's like an avalanche. Try to stop an avalanche, right? It's a phenomenon where it is snowballing. When the phenomena snowballs, it's almost impossible to stop it. It's not that all of a sudden, Bitcoin is going to turn off. It's something that or an atomic reaction or something like that. Once it happens, it continues to grow and do the same thing over and over again in a very precise manner. And you can push it in one direction or another, but it always want to go back to its original path. So, this is why I was telling you that this, yes, the returns are decreasing in time. It's part of how the mathematics works. But, we are still going to be better than the stock market for many years to come. It will take another 15 years to go down to 22%, 23%, right? So in all these periods, we are going to be much higher than the stock market. And, we are reaching 1 million, and then 5 million, then 10 millions. I think by the time we reach 10 millions, the market cap of Bitcoin will be equivalent to almost all the Earth wealth. And at that point, so if it is not 10 million, it will be 15 millions or 20 millions. But by the time it reaches this order of magnitude, because it's going to represent basically the entire wealth of the world, because, it's kind of close to 400 trillions, right? And that will be what we get if we have a $20 million Bitcoin in terms of market cap. Large nations will pay attention, and it's not going to be just like a little strategic reserve, that many people think is what is going to break the power law. I don't think so. What is going to break the power law is when large nations are going to fully adopt Bitcoin as their standard, as their monetary standard. So if they decide that, we are going to use Bitcoin as our currency, or we are going to peg the dollar to Bitcoin. And I think that will happen when Bitcoin is so big that they cannot ignore it anymore. Because at that point, it's going to represent, market caps that are bigger than the GDP of entire nations like the United States or Russia and so on. Something critical is going to happen at that time. And then, yes, because part of what we discussed, right, with Bitcoin is on the edge, between order and disorder. When something event like that happen, is very similar to when water becomes ice. It's a phase transition, what we call a phase transition. It is also linked with this phenomena of critical, with this idea of critical phenomena. And so we will have a phase transition. And now the story of the power law will end, because if it is pegged to the dollar, there is no a change, right, of Bitcoin relatively to the dollar. It will be a different phase of history, and a new chapter in the book. In fact, an entire different book. We will have to write an entire book, different book from that. Sorry if I took a long time to explain all these things. Did this clarify some of your doubts or questions?
Yeah, I mean, that was, you kind of went through it all. Like, I was just kind of wondering for like a full breakdown of power law, and that pretty much is what this was. This is super fascinating. You dove deep into a lot of different angles. Yeah, I'm trying to think if anything else comes to mind question wise.
And do we have a
I think
chat
so.
from the audience? Because I don't see it. Do the audience has some questions? Or you want me to?
I had seen a couple. It depends on which platform. Sometimes they pop up here, sometimes they don't. There was a question I saw earlier. Let's see if I can pull it up. Sec.
Sure.
Oh, I think. Oh, okay. I think I remember I remember the idea of the question. It was, and we'll probably wrap here. And by the way, for anyone who hasn't already, please give Giovanni a follow. Again, if you're on Twitter, just right above her faces. If you're on YouTube, right below. But it was basically in regards to like where it was kind of related to power law. It's also kind of related to just this year / the next 6 months type of thing. Basically half the camp, if you're bullish, half the camp says Q2 we're going to wrap for this cycle. Half the vote says we're going to finish out this 4-year cycle. We're going to wrap Q4 of 2025. Regardless, everyone's excited. There are some people who think we're not going to do much this year, but I think the question was surrounding around what are your thoughts for this year? New regime in for the next few years as well. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe not as deep on power law, but more just your personal opinion.
Yeah. So my approach in all these, right, is always to try to be as scientific as possible. So this is why I have these comparisons of the cycles, right? Because that is the most scientific way to approach this, is to say, okay, how this cycle looks like in comparison with other ones. And having this framework of a power law, basically subtracting that pattern, because in the past, you can see we follow a very precise pattern. And so how do we look like in comparison with others? That is basically what kind of told you a little bit before. It looks like, because of this anticipation of ETFs, we are kind of already where we should have been, or maybe a little bit higher than what we should have been. We covered a lot of distance during the last few months. People don't realize, right? We went from $16,000, basically 2 years ago when we reached the bottom, and it took 2 years to be 100, right? It's incredible. People, we are sometimes too spoiled with Bitcoin, right? We think that going from 16,000 to 200 in 2 years is not much. We did. But usually at the end, of a second year, it was basically in December, this is when I say, oh, we are supposed to start the bull market, right, in November. Usually it's November, December. And I was kind of right, because we went above the power law and we stayed there for until now, right? So it looks like the beginning of the bull market. It's still early on. Now, if you compare it 1-to-1 with previous cycles, we were supposed to be a little bit more bullish, than we have been. We started very well. It was almost like if you look at the graph, the lower part of the graph where I superimposed the differences from the power law, you can see initially it was almost like a copycat of the previous cycle. And then by this time, the previous cycle will have gone much higher, will have been much more bullish, will have been ripped. But we are not doing that. And there is one element that makes it really different, and it's because people say, oh, it's different because Trump and all the other things. That is the bullish signal. The non-bullish signal is this one. That is a model. They mention this all the time. That is a model of a price of Bitcoin based on liquidity. And you can see this is what we were doing for some time. This is why I have these two green lines. The price was going down, and the liquidity was growing up. And they thought, okay, they will kind of cross each other, and will be the other way around, where the price is below the purple line, the white line is the price, and the purple line is a model of what the price should be if it is based on what is called global liquidity. So basically, the movement of money from banks, from large investors, etc., from national funds, etc. And the reason why I did that is because if you look at this chart in all the previous period when we had bull runs, the purple line was always above the green line, the white line. So we had basically a green region that was associated with just a few months before the bull run started. And then usually the purple line and the white line move up together, up to come very close to the top. And then close to the top, so I can show you how they look like, right? So you start with this green area just before the bull run, then both the liquidity and the price grow up, they grow together, and then just before the top, the liquidity does its own thing and the price does its own, right? So it's basically when it's all driven by FOMO and there is no relationship between the two. And then actually it's almost like an anticipator that we are in really super bubble territory, right? And there will be a correction. And this year, we are not seeing this thing that happens every time we have a bull run, right? You see, it's all green, all green. This time, we don't. And because there was this deviation. So it seemed we were going there. And then just before crossing, they decided to separate. The price started to get bullish and the liquidity started to go down. Now, we see a little bit of turning around. It happened before, so I don't want to give it too much significance, because I was kind of tricked here. I told everybody, hey, guys, liquidity is turning around. That is cool. Because I know I do this every Friday. In fact, in a couple of hours, I will do what they call market updates that people can check on YouTube. And I was discussing about that, and then the price went down. So I don't want to get my hopes up, because between me and you, I really think that we do need this liquidity, because it's possible that we still went up and we had all this relatively bullish action because things like ETFs and Sailor, etc. But I'm not sure that Sailor and ETF alone are enough to create the bull market, because I do like the bull market. I think it's an important component. It's exciting. We got to 200. Now there will be a correction, and what you do with that is a different discussion. I don't want to go there. Should we sell a little bit of our Bitcoin to get some of these gains and then buy back when we are at the bottom? Many people criticize me to say things like that, but it's a different discussion. But look, the bull market, if it happens, I think it needs to be supported by liquidity. After all this, I was not certain. This is why I put a big question mark. I think that is the missing ingredient, that we need this additional liquidity. If we have it, then I think we will see a bull market, and it will be kind of what I described here. I say what to expect, that we are going to reach. You see, this is my projections. Basically, we are going to reach 200K, and it's going to be at the end of the year, like all the other bull market happen. We are not too far from that, right? It's another $100,000. So differently from many other influencers, or people, analysts, whatever you want to call them, that I think are just guessing stuff. I'm trying to be as mathematical and as precise as possible. And so my prediction is not very, some people consider it too conservative. I consider it realistic, right? So it's not impossible at all that we reach that, and then there will be a correction, because that is the other thing that people say, oh, this time is different, we are not going to have a correction. I think these bubbles have some kind of role in how Bitcoin is evolving, and this play between the general trend and the bubble has been kind of a very important way that Bitcoin has existed so far, So I'm still expecting the bubbles to be there. They are going to be smaller and smaller and less relevant. You see how it became smaller over time, right?
Sure.
The first one were very, very large, because it's more difficult to move around, $2 trillion than just a few $100 million, right? So to answer your question, yes, I think the bubble is going to happen. There is only that element of a liquidity, but maybe is going to turn around. And if all the things come together, we should see a bubble. And this is how it will play out. I think we will reach close to 200, and then there will be a correction. And if that correction is also true, then we go back to the support, and that is about 70K. So let's see how it plays out, But if this is under the assumption that everything looks exactly like in the previous cycles. If it looks exactly like everything, then this is what is to expect, under this premise.
Interesting. And that 70K bottom.
Yeah, interesting.
It's going to be appetizing for a lot of people. I know myself, I've not been able to load up during bear markets until this time, hopefully around this next one. I was always broke during the bear market. So my goal this year is to not be completely out of the game and to pick up as much Bitcoin as possible. I mean, I'm sure you are, as much as I am, extremely bullish on Bitcoin, even not so much just from like a price standpoint, but just from what it represents, what it's done. It's been so incredible. There's definitely something to this coin, that's a bit more special maybe than a random meme coin that we see dropped on a Tuesday. There's something about this coin that's just, it's doing something.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's a pity because the word outside, right? Some people are starting to go deep in this power law, rabbit hole. But when I try to explain that to external people that don't even know about Bitcoin, I think it's supposed to be actually a way to convince them that there is something into Bitcoin. Many people told me actually that was the thing that pushed them to actually buy Bitcoin. I get DMs like that all the time. But yeah, there is a lot to learn, right? There is a lot to learn. It's a learning process and it's a transformative process. But I think it's unstoppable. That is the real lesson from the power law, that there is something deep, there is some deep mechanism. It's like these cities, right? Try to stop a city. Once a city, this Jeffrey West, and maybe this is where we can conclude. He has this, when you listen to the lecture, but please do when you have a chance, he concludes the lecture saying, corporations follow these exponential paths, and many corporations die. Like the majority of corporations die within 100 years. Like there are very, very few corporations that have survived 100 years because basically this exponential growth is a little bit like cancer, right? Cancer also grows as an exponential. They eat their own host. Then they run out of resources and they die. And then he say a much more sustainable growth. It is still very fast because we are talking about the power of 6, right? It's incredibly fast growth, but it's more sustainable because it kind of scales up in time, are these power laws, and cities follow power laws. And he says cities are eternal because he gives the example of Rome, right? Have been around for thousands of years. He gives the example of Nagasaki and Hiroshima that were literally nuked. You nuked the city and then they came back because if you go now in Japan and visit the city, they are very lively. Almost you have to go actually to the center of explosion to see monuments that were kept like that after the destruction as monuments, right? To even know that there was an atomic bomb in that city and they recovered. So he said it's basically you can do a lot of things to a city and the city will come back and it will continue to grow because it's ruled by these laws, that are very flexible and sustainable. And Bitcoin, it's amazing that is associated with this phenomena. It's part of this phenomenon. I say Bitcoin is a force of nature. It's a force of nature. Are not meme coins. You cannot stop them. You cannot crush them. It's going to continue. It's going to be something fundamental about human history. Like all the other things that we created, like big important things like cities. For example, it's a digital city. It's this creation that we together brought to life, and now it has its own life. It's its own organism. So it's different. It's a really fascinating phenomenon. Worth to be studied.
Absolutely, definitely, man. Listen, Giovanni. Thank you so much, seriously, for taking me through this. I'm gonna have to rewatch this again a couple more times. I think this was really, really cool, and I'll probably have to have you back at some point. Maybe we'll go through it again, or we'll hit a different angle, or talk about something. But this is really, really fascinating for me. This year is really the first year that, yeah, absolutely. This year is the first year that I understood Bitcoin for what it was. Everything else, every year before was, oh, it's that thing that goes up. It's like an altcoin, right? It's like Solana, they're all the same thing. This year, I was on Bitcoin Spaces that we host at Wolf. And eventually I started to notice, it's like RFK dumps all his money into Bitcoin. All these billionaires dumping irrational amounts of money just into Bitcoin, not in Ethereum, not Solana, not Cardano, just Bitcoin. And I was like, am I missing something? Can you explain why just Bitcoin? Like these have other, what's the play? What am I missing? And he was like, okay, you're looking at this wrong. He goes, let's actually explain what Bitcoin is. And he started from the bottom. It was Simon Dixon, who's also been in the Bitcoin game for a little while, doing a lot in England. And after that space, I remember I was like, okay, that changed fundamentally how I thought about it. And then I went to the Bitcoin conference, just was surrounded by Bitcoin energy. And I was just like, okay, I get it. I'm in.
But there is no second best, right? And that actually, even that, if you allow me, is part of this understanding and framework, because there is a name, it's called the network effect. Once you have a network like Bitcoin that has the right momentum, the right number of people, etc., you cannot allow a second best. You're going to, it's going to dominate. This is why, Bitcoin is 100,000, the next coin is 3,000. Right? And it's not just the price, it's everything else. The network effect, because that is a question that we always ask me. Why Ethereum doesn't show these network properties? Why the other coin? Because you need to have a certain momentum and certain size to start to show this network property. And once you have them, it's almost impossible for the other systems to compete. And so there is a name for this. It's called the network effect. And it's dominant with Bitcoin. But, it's something that we can discuss another time, because it's another rabbit hole. Why do we have this network effect in the first place? That's really fascinating.
Very nice. Well, listen, if there's any last things you want to say in terms of plugging anything or something that's coming up, definitely let the audience know. Otherwise, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, take your time, because I know these ideas are difficult, to not just understand, because really it's relatively simple math and concepts. It's just putting it together in the context, connecting the dots. But, please explore, because independently of Bitcoin, you will learn a lot of things. That is also one of the fantastic things about being a Bitcoiner, that you are exposed to so many new people, new ideas, new frameworks, And so I'm learning always something new almost every day by exploring Bitcoin and interacting with other people. So start with that video that, Cade linked. And then if you have a chance to read the book, come to my X. If you want to interact more with me, I have a Discord group that people can join. We have these indicators, take it step by step, because it's worthwhile to learn and explore new things. And Bitcoin, besides giving us freedom, give us also that, it involves us in the world in a much more meaningful way, something bigger than us. So.
Yeah, yes. Definitely. Yeah. And let me do that right now. I'm going to add this link. I had it up here, forgot to comment it under below. So let me do that right now. For anyone who's on X, if you're on X right now, just, first follow Giovanni. And then secondly, go ahead and click the YouTube video that I pinned under the stream on ours. And then if you're on YouTube, let me put it here in the comments just so people can check it out. There we go. Popped up. There we go. So it's inside the chat. So Zach says $46 million might be bearish. It could be. It could be, Zach. In fact, it probably is on a long enough time scale. So anyways, Giovanni, thank you again for coming on. We'll have to bring you back.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. And then anyone who's watching, please give them a follow, retweet the stream, quote tweet, tag a friend, let people know that you enjoyed it. If you did, probably give it a rewatch if you watched it for the first time today, or definitely check out the YouTube video and do a little bit of research, because this is a really fascinating topic. And we'll see you all in the next one, guys. We do spaces and streams every single day here at Wolf. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Bye, everybody.